Technology makes our lives better. Any ideas?
No.
All right, I'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Michael John. I do go by MJ, so you don't have to worry about that first name, last name thing. And I've been making commercial games for 20 plus years, which is great to be here today, because normally when I say that, people think, oh my God, you're so old. And no offense, but this feels much better. What I'd like to do, you're welcome. What I'd like to do today, though, is to try to break down a barrier, which is there's this, I think, a feeling that commercial games are this sort of unassailable, amazing black box of mystery that somehow engages kids forever. And here's the thing: is that's true, okay? But games are also a thing that's very plastic and fluid, and is changing a lot. And I'm going to make the following case. But first, I'm going to start with something to wake you up. Ready?
Orton in the gun.
I love this.
Right
this is a great play from the NFL from about 2 years
again
ago.
To the sideline. Batted up. Oh, God! Stokely down the sideline. Can they catch him? Stokely! Wow! Touchdown! Denver! Unbelievable! Oh my goodness! What a play!
Sports are engaging.
7 yards. Whoa!
All right, so I'm going to talk about John Madden football today. And a few things happened on that play. That was a really early play in the season a couple years ago, right after EA had signed Gus Johnson to be the announcer for John Madden football. And immediately the email exploded around the company saying, "We got that guy. We got the whoa guy." All right, so normally we ask this question, right? This is GlassLab sort of raison d'etre. How can games help assessment? I'm going to ask a different question today, which is how can assessment help games? And I'm going to tell you some stuff that I actually believe, which is that maybe psychometrics actually can make games better. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to tell you a little bit. I've been working at Electronic Arts for the past 6 years, and my title is Senior Creative Director at Large, and I often tell people that is, yes, as cool as it sounds. Which is to say, I get to travel all around all the different areas of Electronic Arts and learn about everything that's going on, talk to all the creatives in every team, and try to help them with their challenges. So I got to spend a lot of time with the John Madden football team. They're in Orlando, Florida, and learned a lot about how they work. And that's been pretty amazing. And I want to talk about Madden also because it's a completely procedural game, which is to say no one authors the story of Madden or the level progression of Madden. It's just football. It's a simulation. All right? So that helps us to think about how this works. And the people at Madden are very, very open-minded to new ideas because they have to be. But they have a problem. They have a terrible, terrible problem, which goes something like this. American football is hard, okay? If you ever tried to explain American football to someone from another country, you understand what I'm saying. There's another problem, which is that Madden is even harder. Adapting that incredibly complex game with 22 players on the field at the same time to a controller with 14 buttons on it, which is actually how many there are 14, makes Madden unbelievably difficult to play. And that's a problem because that means not that many people can actually enjoy it. Plenty of people buy it, but not that many people enjoy it. And so this actually threatens the business, and it threatens the fun of the product. So the Madden team knows this. They call this what they call the coffee table problem, which is every year they know a large percentage of their audience buys John Madden football, puts it on the coffee table so that everyone can see that they bought it, but never actually plays it. So this is not awesome, and this is not what we want. And they're trying to make it more accessible. Now, if you had this coffee table, that's a whole different story, right? That's actually real. It's a Nintendo controller table. I want it really, really bad. It's $3,000 on Etsy. If anybody has $3,000 you want to give me, I will buy that table. So they keep doing it, and it's really, really hard. So I'm going to explain some of the things that they've done. The first thing is the most automatic thing, right? I'm going to create tutorials. Everyone loves my tutorials, except for the fact that actually nobody does. And they never play them. And we know this from watching the telemetry data that people just skip right over the tutorials. They don't even start. They've provided a lot of information on the EA.com website. This is great. It has all these instructional videos. A few people watch them, but not, again, the audience that we want to reach, which is people that don't understand the game already. In 2009, they did an amazing thing, and I want to show you some video that helps you to understand it, which they created a thing called Madden IQ. And here's what Madden IQ is, and just kind of watch the video. I'll talk over it.
Use a combination
so the coach comes up,
special move.
and he's telling you, like, you're going to do this little exercise, and it's going to grade you on how well you can do the exercise. All right?
Press the correct button.
Press the correct
Leave
button.
them and it does.
So we're training someone on how to do the game. Remember, the whole episteme here is the game, and I don't want to try to convince you otherwise. This is what it looked like. They spent a lot of money making this. They had a whole new rendering system, this whole hinting system, and this is how you do the running game. Oh, move the red sticks like this. Oh, great. So the player would do this, and the more they would do it, the more their Madden IQ would raise, right? And here's the thing. It went terrible, like really, really bad. And why? The players quickly realized that their performance in these tests had almost no correlation to their performance in the actual game. Oops. Oops. So by creating a test that was external to their playing the game, they could excel at it. They can get their Madden IQ really high, and it meant nothing. And very quickly, word got out on the internet, don't bother with Madden IQ, and they killed the feature about 2 years later. Okay, interesting. So my question is, can assessment actually make this better? Yes, Captain ECD. I am here to support my man, Bob Mislevy. I don't care what people say, I think psychometrics is great. All right, so does that make me a psychometrics apologist? So this is ECD for dummies. I am like completely dumb when it comes to this. I just know that I see power in these ideas. So if we think about competency, and in Madden, remember, we've got two competencies to think about. One is American football, and the other is the game. So this is hard. This is a hard problem. Now we create what I'm going to call a player model, what Bob would call a student model. I've got tasks called John Madden Football, and then I'm going to accumulate evidence out of that. And by the way, Madden has had a very sophisticated and thorough telemetry surveillance system for about 10 years. So we've got a lot of data on how people play. So how would we construct this model? And by the way, I do need to caveat this very quickly. None of this is proprietary information. This is all out of my brain, okay? So I'm not sharing anything that's secrets. So if we were to make a schema of Madden, this is what it means to actually be able to play this game. And it's sort of two trees. One of them is football, and the other is Madden, and then they actually have an intersect set as well. Well, we could do this. And when I've talked with the team about this, and we kind of started to sketch this out on a whiteboard, they're like, well, we know this in our, like, the back of our heads. And I was like, yeah, that'd be cool, wouldn't it? They're like, yeah, that'd be really cool. We could do a lot with that. Okay, cool. And so we like this idea of having a player model. It makes sense, especially the people who work on procedural games or emergent games like Madden. They get it. This took about 2 minutes to explain, and then we were done. All right, so here's some ideas that I had. If we actually had a ECD system built into Madden, what might we do as a bunch of new features that would actually make the game better? So we've got a competency map built. We have an analytics system, which we already have. We've got a player model, and then a state machine. And I want to just very quickly throw that out there. Everything we do in games is based, at the end of the day, on some kind of finite state machine where the game has got a set of data that it uses to decide what to do next. Like, that's just how we build these things. If we built another state machine that holds the player model, allow the two state machines to query each other, that's very powerful. Here we go. First idea. Right now, oh, by the way, despite what you may have heard recently, like as recently as yesterday, game designers pay really, really close attention to the zone of proximal development. We care about this intimately, unless we're awful. So anyway, Madden at the moment just throws you in. It says, here's the whole game. Good luck, have fun. But if we knew where you stand in terms of your competency, well, we could give you much better tasks. We could say, I'm only going to reveal certain numbers of those 14 buttons to you right now until you've proven to me that you're competent in that space. I might change the plays that you can select. I might change the difficulty that you're matched up against, that kind of thing, all based on trying to keep you in this scaffolded space rather than just throwing you off the deep end, which is what the game does today. Excellent idea. Okay, Madden IQ 2.0. Instead of actually doing this with an external test, we actually measure your experience in the simulation. And then we give you a Madden IQ score. We found that the players, and I'm using we because I was at EA at the time, were very engaged by the idea of raising their Madden IQ. And they were very rapidly comparing each other's scores online. But when it became considered irrelevant, that all died. If we can keep it relevant inside the game, then people will care about it a lot. And I would argue that there's something powerful in using a Bayes analysis to actually extract what that score might look like. Like I said, I'm a Bob Mislevy apologist. Here's my favorite picture of Bob. If we implement ECD and we have a 4-process model where we can actually select what comes next, that opens up all kinds of fun stuff. So I could say, actually, I've identified this weakness in your game. I'm going to put you up against an opponent who will exploit that weakness, and then I'll explain how that happened. Just like a coach would do on a practice field. All right? But I'm going to do it for you inside the context of the game because I know you. I've seen that node in your player model as being a weak spot, and I'm going to exploit that with the AI. Not even difficult to do. I can have Madden, the game already has a system that recommends what plays you should run next. That's already there. Most people use it. I can have it recommend to you plays that will again, help you improve your performance, help you learn new things within the system of the game. And I can do the same thing with the opponents. I could create a trainer. So they have a skills trainer. This is from the most recent version of the game, Madden 25. And all it does is just ask you to complete everything. You see it says 0% complete. We're back to tutorial land here. And the guys know it. They looked at the telemetry. Once again, nobody does it. But if instead I told you, there are 3 drills I want you to do, not the 40 that are currently available. There are 3. This is why I selected them for you, and I think you'll see yourself improve if you do these drills, right? And I selected them for you based on your in-game performance, based on your performance in the simulation. That might be completely different in how people approach these kind of tutorials. And we might even call that formative assessment. Right now, it gives you medals. It gives you badges. Guess how motivating that is? Nobody cares. Here's another one. We can do stuff in the game. I got lots of these, by the way. I can see my time, but I got lots of ideas. As soon as we start building this player model, we can do all kinds of stuff inside a game. Right there in the middle of a game, we could give you feedback. Now, the game already does this. It has it built into the replay feature. When I shared this idea with the team, they're like, oh, we already have that in the replay feature. I say, okay, that's cool. How do you decide what hints to give people during the replay? And they go, yeah, right? I said, well, how about if you decided what hints to give them based on their player model, based on their known weakness or their known strength, right? Like, it's great what you just did. Watch how great those outcomes were. They're like, that is such a good idea. So it would be really great to take these very sophisticated features that are already in the product, just give it this extra little layer that we'll call psychometrics, and then now it could give you a hint that is really, really going to be nice and personalized to every player's experience. Next up, matchmaking. I don't know, does anyone know what ELO is, the chess ranking system? A few people do. If you are tennis rankings, like all these kind of ranking systems use something that was invented, I don't know, about 150 years ago, of how to compare two people. And it has to do with, like, if I beat another person, but that person substantially outranked me, then I get a jump in rankings, where if I beat somebody who's below me, I get maybe no change at all. All right, so these are the systems that we use in games for online matchmaking. They work fabulous, and we know they work fabulous because we can go look at the normal distribution of won and loss records. However, we could do better. We could say, I want to match you up against somebody whose skills actually will work very well against your particular skills. And that's going to go badly for you. And I know it's going to go bad for you because I'm setting you up to fail. But I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to have the coach tell you why you failed and how you can improve based on that performance. So yeah, we do know that our matchmaking is good. Oh, I shouldn't have put the Super Bowl up here as an example of good matchmaking, should I? My bad. By the way, does anyone find it ironic and funny that we're at an assessment conference and people keep standing up here and giving multiple choice questions and asking you to raise your hands? I don't know, I just... next one, tutoring systems. This is something that game people have toyed with forever. What if we could actually find a way to get our really strong players to interact with our weak players in such a fashion that they want to level each other up? And we've created incentive systems for this, and we've tried to get it done, and sometimes it works. It works in the informal space. We see this, for example, with YouTube, but we don't necessarily see it as part of the integration to the what Jim G would call the big G game of what we're trying to create. So what if we could take our player model, use that to matchmake, to say, this is a person who's extremely good at pass defense, who always seems to do really well at pass defense. I will now incentivize you through some in-game currency or something to go tutor a bunch of people in their pass defense, and if their player model raises in pass defense, you get more coins. That'd be awesome. I would love to see this happen. What am I doing? And then last would be, listen, we've got a BaseNet, we've got a player model. We can train that BaseNet because we know that works, and we can use this to get a better and better idea of what our best players do when they're playing. And the team themselves, this is something for whom the audience is the team themselves. Like they want to understand, they're constantly trying to understand how does a good player play, what does it mean for a good player to be a good player. This would be a way for them to do that kind of retrospectively. And also it identifies design weaknesses in the simulation. All right, so that's it. How can the salesman help games? Plenty, lots. Like we could make lots and lots of money. That's the thought. But by the way, funny story. Right now I do work for Electronic Arts. I spend about 75% of my time doing that and about 25% of my time doing GlassLab. And as of last Friday, I'm going to resign my position at Electronic Arts so I can do this all the time. So I think this is a pretty good idea. And that's it. I've got 1 minute left, but I think assessment and games are not antithetical at all. I think that games are actually ready. Even the most sort of banal, entertainment-oriented games can benefit from the kind of stuff that the people in this room do. And don't think of those as being enemies, think of them as being friends. And that's what I like to say, so thanks.
So that was great, MJ, thank you very much. I have nothing substantive to contribute about Brandon Stokely, but a lot of what you were saying reminded me of my beloved 9-year-old daughter's soccer team. My husband is her coach. And one of the things you find, and some of you may be all too familiar with that culture, is this idea of coaching for development, right? When you're in a space where there's not millions of dollars in advertising money at stake in your win-loss record, where you're really coaching to develop mastery at a game. You're going to coach in a very different way. And that a lot of a coach's job ends up being communicating with parents whose perception of soccer is your job is to get my kid to kick the ball really far so it goes in the goal so we score lots of goals. And to get out of that mindset and into a developmental mindset, everything you were saying about the feedback in the game is exactly what coaches do around drills. So it's a really interesting model of when there are not high stakes attached to assessment, when you can do that kind of formative work and be transparent about the purposes and goals of assessment in a system, that people can really rise to that occasion and build that mastery over time. It's nice. So thank you. So the work I'm talking about is the work of many, many people. This is work that's happened over actually 5 years, which is also a sort of, oh my God, that's so old, kind of thought these days. So I just wanted to say my thank yous up front. This work was funded by the Institute for Education Sciences, and our center, which we call Possible Worlds, was the parallel center to CATS. There were 2 grants made. And I want to thank the CATS folks at CRESST, who have always been really terrific colleagues to us. We've taken the work in very, very different directions, which I know I've enjoyed. I hope you guys have. And Gurley and Greg in particular have always been really good colleagues, co-commiserators at times. And we've really enjoyed sort of going through this whole path with you guys. I also want to thank First Playable Productions, who are our game partner. They're a commercial Nintendo development shop. I'm not going to talk about platform really today. But I just want to note, we, 6 years ago when this work started, The Nintendo DS was what we did our development for, because we knew we wanted to work with portable devices for a number of reasons. Obviously, over a 6-year arc, there's no predicting what portable means. The games that I'm talking about today are all available online now. So we did port those over, but that's why we worked with a Nintendo shop, and First Playable is a great, great bunch of people. We worked with them straight through the whole project, and they brought a lot of value to what we did. So I work at a place that's been investigating how we can use technology to support high-quality teaching and learning for about 25 years. And I've actually worked there for most of that 25 years. And so what our work has always been about is not about how far can we take the technology, but what are the persistent teaching and learning problems that classroom teachers are running into, that kids hit developmentally, that are hard problems, and what are the emergent capacities of new technologies that are coming up on the horizon that might help us to address those problems. And that leads you to sort of frame questions and pursue answers to questions in somewhat different ways than you do when you start with what is the technology good at. So we started this project from this set of questions. It was very sort of typical for how we tend to approach problems, in that we started with existing instructional environments. So we really embrace what you could arguably or not call everyday classrooms. This is not about special environments. How do we think about games in environments where you may or may not have reliable broadband, where there may be 4 computers for 25 kids, all those kind of deeply unsexy problems that exist in schools. How can we create games? How can we think about games as part of larger instructional arcs? Teachers, we know, think about curriculum as a process of drawing materials, organizing space and time available to them to guide their kids through ongoing learning processes, right? And that anything that's really difficult and worth learning and grappling with, an emergent learning process, is something that kids are going to have to encounter in multiple media at multiple times, in multiple organizations of peers and experts. So where might games fit in those processes for particular learning goals? And of course, then, how do we think about outcomes? So the stakes we put in the ground long ago were to focus on portable devices, get the learning out of the classroom, get the gameplay out of the classroom, away from the infrastructure problems, and in a sense, protect the play. Let the game be something that you're doing on the bus, you're doing in your library, you're doing at your after-school program, you're doing with your friends around your shared DSs, that you're not doing in a miserable computer lab with that mean computer supervisor who you hate. Or maybe you love them, I don't know. And we focused on middle grade science, and we gave ourselves sort of this moonshot of focusing on some of the classic scientific misconceptions, which we did partly because it's really hard, so we wanted to see what would happen if we tried to tackle that. We did it for developmental reasons. So how many of you have been in a middle grade classroom in the last month, semester, something? Oh, good. Good for you. Middle grade science is a time and a body of curriculum where you're really asking kids to use their rapidly expanding capacity to think systematically and analytically about abstract systems that are not empirically immediately observable to them. They're coming out of their elementary years, where science is largely about learning materially about the world around you, about how to observe, how to describe, how to measure, how to count, the things that you can see and feel and touch and hear and smell. I might have repeated one there. And you're beginning to think about things that are often deeply non-intuitive and that you can't observe directly. So when I'm teaching you about photosynthesis and I show you a plant, on some level that plant is deeply unhelpful to the process, right? Because I can't see photosynthesis. And whatever you tell me about what's happening in that plant, I have precisely no reason to believe you about why your particular crazy story about how plants grow is actually true. So that's what we took on. And what we basically came up with, we developed 4 modules addressing different scientific misconceptions. Each one is centered on a game, but also includes materials for the classroom. So gameplay becomes homework. As I said, it happens outside of instructional time, protects the instructional time for the teacher, gets you out of, what Alan referred to as the time problem, at least one of the logistical time problems, of you're not interrupting instructional time that teachers need. And we really treat the games as supplements to topics that teachers are already teaching. Gameplay occurs prior to instruction. So games are assigned as homework at the beginning of a unit, before the teacher's done any direct instruction or hands-on inquiry or other kinds of activities that they might be doing. Again, the game's supplemental. All of these games are designed so that when you have spent half an hour, or 2 hours, or whatever you choose to do, playing that game, you don't have any felt sense that you know anything about photosynthesis, which one of the games is about, heredity and randomness in heredity, which another one of them is about, or about the nature of electricity or heat transfer. Those were our 4 games. What you know is the mechanic of the system that you've played, that you've become very familiar with. And what you're coming into the classroom with is then a shared conceptual model of what works in the game. And what that becomes is one piece then of this instructional arc. And the reason I put all these different pieces up here is just to remind us that teachers do this cherry picking, this pulling together of materials. And we wanted to require of ourselves that our games make sense to teachers in relation to all the other materials and content that they have available to them. So more specifically, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that model really builds a lot on Dan Schwartz's work on preparation for future learning, which some of you may have recognized already. So more specifically, the sort of take we took on preparation for future learning was to focus on analogical reasoning. So this prior experience kids now have that they've shared in the game becomes a common base to be used for reasoning about your target concept, which is what the teacher then is still in a role of explicating and guiding kids through exploration of in the classroom. This is relevant for misconceptions because what you've done is you've taken your point of reference away from kids' everyday experiences of these concepts, which typically are not useful and are actually an obstruction to their ability to reason about these abstract systems that you're trying to convince them are worth understanding. So the reason I put this picture up is because this is a process that we're actually very comfortable with in early childhood classrooms. Those of you that have worked in the early childhood space, sand tables, water tables, building blocks, my favorite thing of all time. If you haven't read the block book, you should read the block book, by the way, if you're a game developer. These are materials that kids become deeply familiar with, play with in social spaces, play with in open-ended ways, that then become resources to support reasoning and development of understanding of new concepts over time. This is also something we're very comfortable with in experts. This is a way that there's all kinds of writing on creativity and scientific discovery that models how that this is a critical part of how scientists reason about complex and abstract new systems and ideas that are emergent. It's something that I think middle school kids need opportunities to do as well. So that's sort of our premise. What I'm going to talk about for the rest of my 8 minutes and 26 seconds is this. There's a timer here that goes down to the 1,000th of the second, and it's freaking me out. I'm going to focus on our findings about teachers and about the teacher's role. It should be obvious that everything about this model that we've created, again, really locates gameplay as part of a broader ecology and really challenges us to think about if that game experience does it play any kind of catalyzing role to deepen and improve the quality of the learning and teaching experience that's going on already in schools. So to talk about that, I want to first just give you a super quick glimpse of, just to give you a sense of the flavor of the games. This was our heredity and genetics game, which I'm going to talk about briefly in a couple of minutes, and focused on robots and recycling robots and battling robots. It's a Pokemon-style game. This is not a great screenshot, but that's from our heat transfer game called Galactic Gloop Zoo. That's our electricity game, which is also really interesting to talk about what did not work about that game, but I don't think I'm going to have time for it today. It was based on ideas about music, because what we wanted to get kids grappling with was the idea that electricity is not a substance, right? That it's not a liquid, and it's actually about alignment and the passage of energy and coordination of energy within space. And then the Ruby Realm, our first and most beloved game, which is about photosynthesis, and that robot down there is a biobot, which, since we invented Bob, is actually a real thing out there in the world, who uses photosynthesis to produce glucose to power himself. So I'm going to be speaking very quickly from a range of field tests that we did. We spent a lot of time working with these games, and I should say there are associated materials we created to support teachers in building those bridges, building those analogical connections between the core mechanics of the games and their target concepts. We gave them some specific activities. We gave them a consolidation activity that was really a literacy-rich reading and writing task, which I'll talk about. So we spent a lot of time in field tests watching teachers use these materials with kids. And we also did an experimental trial just on this one, on the photosynthesis game. And so I'm going to start with kind of sort of a summative finding and kind of unpack it a little bit based on the field test data. So our randomized trial did not show an impact on students. But because we knew that the teachers, and this was a study with 42 teachers and something like 700 or 800 kids, 7th graders. And because we knew that the teachers played a significant role in this process, this was not a kid-to-game interaction in isolation that we were interested in, we collected class secondary data on the teachers, which is an observational measure of teacher quality. I'm a huge fan of the class. If you're curious about it, I'll tell you about it. It's distributed by a group called Teachstone. It came out of Vanderbilt. And so what this figure shows you, this did not quite reach significance, but for the purposes of driving our future research, I think it's a really important trend. It's also very consonant with a lot of what we saw in the field tests. So class S scores can run between 1 and 7, and that's an average of scores on different indices. And so that's what's on the x-axis, and the y-axis is class aggregate assessment scores on the post-test. And what you see is that for the control teachers, while we all probably have in our heads, and it's largely true, the teacher's quality of instruction is a critical driver in kids' achievement. In this particular case, there wasn't a strong association for the control teachers between quality of assessment, as we measured it with the class S, and the student outcomes. But there was a pretty clear interaction, or a strong trend, for the treatment teachers. So that is to say that the kids who had teachers who scored well in the class and used the materials did, on the average, outscore the treatment kids who also had high-quality teachers, and the reverse was true. So basically, yep.
Why are they starting?
I'm sorry?
Why are they starting from different points? Wouldn't the kids start, unless I'm misunderstanding, would they start at the same level and then you have the control?
Those are post-test scores. Their mean post-test scores. So that's not change over time. The trend in the X line is the quality of the teacher's instruction as measured by the class. So, this is a provocative finding to me, but it's also pretty opaque. What does this mean? Well, if you go back to the field tests and some of the other information from the trials, it's there are some clues to that. So I'm going to talk about them in terms of sort of the logistical piece, issues about curriculum alignment, and then questions about how the games maybe shifted some of the ecology in the classroom. So this just really quickly, on the sort of level of logistical management, actually teachers' willingness to use the materials, it's a very simple story. The teachers used the materials. The machines went home. The kids played the games. That really worked. I don't know why that happened, but I'll just keep talking. There was a much more, a stickier problem, and one that actually is a really systemic problem, and not so much about the details of the intervention, I think, was about curricular alignment. That the games, when you got down to it, the games were there to help the teachers deepen their teaching on topics that they didn't actually have very ambitious goals for. So the simplest example is the heredity game really invited the teachers to talk about issues like the fact that dominance and recessive is not equivalent to betterness and worseness, that recessive characteristics can actually be advantageous in different settings, which of course is a very Pokemon concept. That really wasn't something that the teachers ever tried to drive to, and they would acknowledge this. They understood what we were sharing with them. But these are 7th graders who are getting teed up for the 8th grade science assessment. Kids that need, you know what they need to know about heredity? They need to know how to produce a Punnett square. And that's what the teachers were teaching the kids to do. So it's not a time problem, and it's not really a content mastery problem. It's an alignment problem. So we saw this again in the fidelity material from the RCT. Teachers didn't, the piece that they really did the least was to make those explicit links between the game and the target concepts. But the good news is that even if teachers didn't do the specific, particular analogical mapping, and if you know Lindsay Richland's work at all, that was very influential for us. It's really lovely work in math and analogical reasoning. Well, they didn't do that. What they did do was when they did talk about the games with the kids, which they didn't do very much, but when they did do it, what we're seeing when we go back through the field test transcripts is that they really were likely to do much more open-ended questioning and discussion than they would when they weren't talking about the games. So this is an exchange that happened around one of the consolidation activities. It's a fantastic exchange, in part because you've got the teacher in the middle of the slide there saying, you're starting to reason like a scientist. This is the kind of conversation you want to see happening in a classroom. But what the teacher's acknowledging here that I just want to call out is where the kid is in his reasoning at this point is actually wrong. The kid is grappling with this idea of whether he is a substance, whether electricity is a substance, what does it mean to be a substance. But the teacher was there in the moment and recognized that the kid was on the right path. And so he validates what he's saying. He names him as a scientist because of the kind of reasoning he's doing, not because the answer was right. And we're seeing systematically across the field test that the games did invite and support that kind of discussion in the classroom. So I just want to say really quickly, because I'm running out of time, that thinking about the quality of teachers in relation to how we bring games into the classroom is something I think we really have to think about in terms of equity, which is not something we've been talking about a lot here. We cannot rely on teachers as individual actors to make this happen in their classrooms. I think the games in community needs to really engage with the systems in which teachers are working and think much more ambitiously about the roles that we can play in changing the conditions in which teachers are teaching so that they can do this work that they all want to do. They want to do this. They want to connect with where their kids are coming from. And those teachers that are most likely to do this, if we don't help, are the teachers that are doing it already. And I think I'm going to stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. That was not embarrassing at all. Well, good morning, everyone. It's certainly a pleasure to be here. And I must say I am enjoying working with colleagues at CATS and CRESST on trying to understand how we can design educational games. Just out of curiosity, how many of you would consider yourself gamers? Oh my God, okay. You know who you are. I didn't have to define that. We all know that games can be fun, entertaining, exciting, and I guess my focus is more on the boring, nerdy question of whether we can design games that promote academic learning, so what we might call games for learning. In a way, this is an assessment issue. And really for the past decade or so, I've been conducting research on games for learning that I want to kind of summarize and share with you quite briefly this morning. Because I think we're beginning to develop in our field a research base that can inform the design of educational games. I really want to focus on research that addresses three distinct questions because it can be very confusing to look at the game research. It seems like there's just a mass of information out there. But what I've tried to do here is just systematize it into three main questions. Which features of a game increase its effectiveness? So given that we have a game, what could we do to help people learn better from it? That's the value added question. The kind of cognitive consequences question is what is learned from an off-the-shelf game? And the media comparison study has to do with are games, this is a question the public always wants to know, are games more effective than conventional media? So I kind of want to look at each of those, give you examples very briefly of what I mean by those. And my rationale really is I think there's a very strong sentiment, probably among all of us here, that computer games have promise for improving learning, but what I think would be helpful is a scientific research base that would help us develop a more effective way of designing games. So it kind of comes down to the problem that many strong claims are made for the potential of games, but we don't have the strongest research base yet. So a lot of strong claims are made for the value of computer games, but we need empirical evidence perhaps to help inform us. So let me try to explain. All I mean by games for learning are games that are intended to improve performance on some measure of learning outcome. I want to focus just a little bit on this idea of three genres of game research and give you examples of each of these. When we take a value-added approach, basically what I want to do is compare a base version to an enhanced version of a game, and cognitive consequences kind of compare playing a game to either not playing a game or some other activity. And in media comparison, compare playing a game to some standard medium. So let me first start with a value-added approach to game research. So in this situation, we have folks who play the base version of the game, the regular version of the game, and compare that to folks who play what I'm calling an enhanced version. So this has one feature added to it. And we looked at some measure of learning outcome, hopefully a transfer measure, to see which version produces better performance. And in the world of educational outcomes, effect size is something folks want to look at. So in the studies that I want to show you, I'm focusing on D, which is a measure of effect size. And in educational research, an effect size greater than 0.4 is one that I would get excited about, because that's telling us the treatment had a substantial impact. Let me look at some of the studies that we've done just as examples, although there's tons of other great work in the field as well. So I want to look at 5 games that involve a value-added approach that we've carried out in our lab: Design a Plant, Circuit Game, Profile Game, Virtual Factory, and Cache 17. So first let me look at the question of do people learn better from playing this game Design a Plant when words are in spoken form versus printed form? So in all these studies, I'm just taking a game that someone else developed, because I'm not smart enough or creative enough to design some of the wonderful games that we've seen here. And all we've done is add a feature to the game to see how that affects learning. So in this Design a Plant game, this is for middle school science students. You go to, it's a desktop computer game. You go to another planet, you have to design a plant that would survive there, and this guy, Herman the Bug, interacts with you and helps explain really environmental science. You can see from a set of studies that we've done, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 studies, we're getting a very large effect size of greater than 1 when Herman speaks to you in a voice rather than having his words printed on the screen. That might seem like a very trivial issue that you wouldn't even think about in designing a game, but here we're seeing it has a tremendous effect on a measure of transfer at the end of the game, where we ask people to design new plants or explain ideas about environmental science. Another issue is the question, do people learn better from Design a Plant when the words are in conversational style rather than formal style? So when Herman speaks to you, he could say, this is a program about what type of plant survives on different planets. Or he could speak directly to you in first and second person and say things like, you're about to begin a journey where you'll be visiting different planets. Something just as simple as that, using a conversational style, has a huge effect on students' learning. We're seeing an effect size of, again, greater than 1 on a transfer test, just based on Herman the Bug's conversational style. Is this making sense? Am I going fast enough? Okay. Let me look at another question. In playing the Design a Plant game, do people learn better when the words are printed and spoken rather than just spoken alone? Because maybe it would be good to both speak the words and have them on the screen. Maybe that would give people the option of attending to either one. But what we see in the couple studies that we did, putting printed words on the screen that go along with spoken voice actually detracts from learning. We're actually getting a negative effect size from adding captions on the screen that correspond to what Herman's saying, because in a way it's distracting, I think. So this is showing us a feature that doesn't help learning. Another question is, do people learn better from playing Design a Plant when the agent's image is on the screen? So in this case, when Herman the Bug's image is on the screen and he's talking to you. You can see here in a set of 4 studies, we're getting a median effect size of 0.22, which is a very small effect. So actually having to see Herman doesn't seem to be all that important. And the important thing is being able to hear his voice, because his voice conveys a lot of social connection, I think, with the learner. His image doesn't do much. It doesn't move, it doesn't gesture, and in this case, it doesn't seem like it's helping that much. So part of research is to find things that help and also things that don't help. So looks like this maybe doesn't help that much. Let me shift gears to a slightly different game. Some folks would say we shouldn't even dignify this by calling it a game, but it's kind of low-tech, a low-tech game, circuit game, that's explaining about how electric circuits work, and you have to make judgments about how to make 2 circuits equivalent in the speed of the circuit, things like that. In one version of the game, you play without feedback, so when you make a move, you're just, you either get points or you don't. And in an enhanced version, you get points for a correct move, but also you get an explanation. In the study that we've done on this, that creates performance on the 10th level of this game is kind of an embedded transfer test. And people do much better on that level if they've had that explanative feedback along the game. Another question has to do with self-explanation. In the circuit game, do students perform better when they have to engage in self-explanation? And in this case, that involves, after you make a move, selecting from a menu why that was a good move. So you have to just click on, there's a list of reasons, you have to click on the reason that you used. And a set of 3 different studies, we're getting a fairly large effect size of 0.9, that adding a kind of self-explanation feature to a game, which some folks might say destroys the fun of the game, but it increases the educational impact. So I think there's always a tension between the flow of the game and entertainment value of the game and the educational features of the game. So in this case, at least that's helping. Another issue here has to do with reflection, asking people to reflect on the game as they're playing it by having actually a paper worksheet that they have to eventually fill in. In a set of 2 studies, we're getting a medium to large effect size by adding this kind of external paper worksheet you have to fill out. It's short and it doesn't require a lot, but it does focus you on having to reflect on what's going on. One other question in the circuit game is what happens if we add competitive features to the game, because competition is supposed to be helpful, but what we have found in our research is that overall it didn't have an effect. We might not have implemented it very well. One interesting trend here is that it actually hurts the performance of men and helps the performance of women. You can come up with an explanation yourself, like the men are already too competitive and it just pushes them over the top maybe. The profile game, this is a geology simulation where you're going to a surface of the Earth or some planet, and you get to draw lines across it, and then you get to see the profile of the depth of the land. And from drawing a lot of lines, you're supposed to have the spatial ability to be able to determine what geological structures are there, like mountains or ranges or troughs or things like that. And in this game, we're looking at the role of pre-training, where we kind of, in advance, show people what are the possible geological features. When we just give people a little pre-training before they play the game, this has a big impact on their ability to transfer what they've learned to new situations after they've played the game, with an effect size of 0.7. So pre-training seems to help. feel like I'm talking fast. I wonder why. In the Virtual Factory game, this is a simulation game where it's an industrial engineering game where you actually build an assembly line to make some product. We're looking at the role of politeness in the on-screen agent who interacts with you. If the on-screen agent uses polite wording versus just direct wording. So direct wording would be something like, press the enter key, and polite wording would be, shall we press the enter key? Something as seemingly minor as that has a huge effect on transfer test performance, an effect size of 0.9. So I think politeness is a promising issue to look at. Cache 17, which Alan developed, we looked at what happens if we, well, in the original version, it has a strong narrative theme, and we know that in narrative games like this is a narrative adventure game, narrative theme is important, so we wanted to see what happens if we take that out, and in this study, it really didn't have much of an effect. So in some games, maybe narrative theme is very important, and maybe in other games it isn't. We're just beginning to explore this issue. So, so to just summarize the value-added approach, we're getting evidence for a modality effect. It's better, better to have spoken words than printed words. A personalization effect. It's better to use conversational language. Explanative feedback is effective. Self-explanation is effective. Some form of prompting, like using worksheets, pre-training, and politeness have all been shown to be effective. Some unpromising things we've done are redundancy, having both printed and spoken words, having the agent's image, having competition or narrative theme. So those are just examples of how we can use the value-added approach to help inform what's going on in games. Let me very briefly look at these two other approaches. In cognitive consequences, we're trying to use games to improve cognitive skills. So the question is, does playing a off-the-shelf game improve a cognitive skill that's an important academic cognitive skill? So we look at a group that plays an off-the-shelf game versus a group that plays some other game that's not relevant to the skill or doesn't play a game, and we're looking at differences in effect size on that target skill. In the studies that we've looked at an after-school computer club where kids play a variety of academic games, and that Richard Duran was involved in. Where are you? There you are. Brings back good memories. You can see in these studies, participating in that after-school club improved kids' performance on a variety of academic measures with an effect size of 0.7. So this was something that went on after school, but improved kids' academic performance in school. Tetris is one of the most studied games because people hope it's going to improve spatial ability. So in a study that we did in our lab, we didn't get much evidence that playing Tetris transfers to spatial skills other than mental rotation of Tetris shapes. It greatly improves your ability to mentally rotate Tetris shapes, but amazingly, not other things. So it's a very specific kind of learning. Other folks have gotten better effects from Tetris, I have to say. So this is kind of our summary here. Let me look very briefly at the media comparison approach. This is the question of that people in the community always ask, well, will kids learn anything from playing games? Would that be better than reading a book or something? So that's really the issue here, comparing game playing to conventional media. So we looked at this in the Design-A-Plant game, playing the Design-A-Plant game versus just reading the exact same material presented as a tutorial. In this case, playing the game resulted in better transfer performance than reading the tutorial. Cache 17, playing that game versus having a PowerPoint presentation. In that case, we didn't get a strong helpful game effect. And the same for another game called Crystal Island, which teaches you about infectious disease. A PowerPoint presentation was more effective than playing the game in this case. So kind of we get a mixed bag here. Sometimes the game's better, sometimes the PowerPoint presentation's better, and I think there's a lot more research to do here in the media comparison approach. So my conclusion here is that, I almost got done in time. Many strong claims are made for the value of games, but when we take an evidence-based approach, that helps guide the development of games. We're kind of in a very early stage, but I think looking at assessment of game effectiveness in terms of these three genres can be a helpful way of systematizing the field and trying to make sense out of it. So thank you so much for your attention.
So I have an engineering background. That's my one joke. All right. All right, so the theme of the talk is blood, sweat, and tears. Blood being the Super Bowl of these IES center grants, the randomized controlled trial, because it's high stakes, and if we fumble, there's going to be a lot of blood. The sweat part is the journey from zero to hero. And the tears of joy is like the things that come out of it. So let me go, because I've got 17 minutes. So as Jonathan mentioned in his opening remarks, the goal of the project is to develop games, test them, and find out what happens. So the RCT, so this is year 5.5, and so when we started, the question was really simple. Right? So if we develop these games that are research-based, designed on targeting underperforming middle school students, areas of fractions, is that going to be effective? So we sampled, well, here's a factoid. So in the state of California, there's 189 districts. We contacted 189 districts. And the overwhelming response was no response. Anyway, we ended up with 9. And within those 9 districts, 62 classrooms, and and of the 62 classrooms, I think it's the testament of the activity of the games that only 3 dropped out, not because the study sucked, but because the technology wasn't working. I mean, have you seen that before? All right, so real quick on the procedures. Went through, the idea was for teachers to take the games, insert it in their curriculum, where it fit, where it made sense, up to you. 3 hours of professional development, and the important component in the PD was you play the games as the kids would play. You experience the choke points, the common errors, and all the stuff that kids would face as they play it. And then the discussion was around the errors and the strategies to, well, if they do this kind of error, talk about it, and what could you do? In terms of instructional time, we asked for basically 12 days, 12 periods. Pre-test, 10 days of gameplay, and then another day for post-testing. And then $600 for the external activity that they were, the time commitment that they had to put into it. And so our goal was really these kinds of items. So not the in-game measures, but items that were drawn from released CST items, released NAEP items, standardized test kinds of items. So that was the target. Okay, so as Lee mentioned yesterday, there was a difference. Our treatment condition were 4 games we developed on fractions, alternate. The other condition were games we developed on solving equations, and the target was fractions items. So let me start with student perceptions. So we asked students, hey, do you think you learned anything from the game? Did you get into the game? The engagement kinds of skills that we had developed early and validated and sort of measures of engagement, right? So the good news is, as my daughter would say, OMG, right? So based on this data, right? I mean, at least we didn't build games that sucked from the students' perspective. So that was like a phew. Then we asked teachers analogous questions. Did they think, did their students learn stuff? Were the students engaged? Would you use these games again? Right? OMG, again. I mean, these are like 80% of our samples. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the perceptions were that, it's a positive experience for their students. And of course, the money shot, where's Lee? Did his magic. So, comparison condition, multi-level modeling, 0.6, right? So, and just to give you a sense of, well, is 0.6 good or bad compared to other kinds of studies? So these numbers were drawn from a couple of, or IES report plus this John Hattie, who looked at every study in the world. And so as you can see, so the 0.4 here is individual students is like one-on-one tutoring. And so a 0.6 is pretty good, right? So that gets 3 exclamation points. All right, so, and then Lee, so stay tuned for the next session. Lee's gonna talk about like how the methodology and all that stuff. All right, so the sweat. All right, so we had a launch schedule. My engineering background is in like satellite testing, so it's always like shuttle launching. So we had a 2-year development period where we were designing games, creating them, testing, iterating, and then we say, all right, we're gonna lock the study design. And then summer, in summer school, over a 6-week period, we're gonna test it end to end. So work out the procedure, the kinks, the PD, basically make sure the thing works. And just in case, we're gonna do a full dry run under the testing conditions. And so all systems go, RCT starts, and over a period of 3 months, there was virtually 100% of each business day, something was going on in some school in the state of California and Nevada. We also had laptops that were driving around, Tulare, I mean, just these, well, far away. All right, so let me just say something about the development studies. So we did a lot. That's where the sweat was, man. It was like, go, go, go. And we looked at a whole bunch of instructional value of variables, what Rich called the value added. So we said, all right, base game, do this. Base game, do that. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. Our overall development process. So we would basically start on paper, lay out the instructional sequence, all right, test it with 5 kids, debug it, and then test it with 30 kids in the classroom. Look for pre-test, post-test, different gains, basically. All right, so once it's good on paper, transition it to the computer format. Not a full game, but just computer. You go through that cycle again, test it looks good, and then develop a prototype that has, sort of has the gamey features, not polished. Test it again, and then if it looks good, do the instructional variations, and then it passes all that, then it makes it into the RCT bin. So that whole process came through with 4 games covering number line, fraction concepts, inverse operations with fractions and functions, and the solving equations, operations on integers, expressions, and two kinds of solving equations, conceptual and procedural. All right, so just a little bit on some of the game development results. So, I mean, one of the biggest things we found was less feedback is way better. Like, do not pile on the instructional feedback. And just to be sure, we replicated the study with like college students, and we're finding the same thing. Different game, same idea. The idea of the narrative and avatar choice and all that. So yeah, you do that, more engagement, but no difference on the outcomes. But helpful because we'd roll that into the design. And a whole bunch of other stuff that you can see there. In terms of, we'd also get feedback from students. They tell us, wow, it'd be great if you had like, 3D graphics and sounds. That would be great. But, right. Okay, so, oops. So really, out of the development studies, we can develop games that result in higher scores on some post-test scores. I think as someone mentioned, there's a difference between teaching and practice. So we started off with teaching, trying to teach concepts, and then I think we evolved slightly towards more the practice model. So making assumptions about the students, that they have more prior knowledge, and then they can engage in more sustained practice. The other things is our game designers will be the first one to say, man, these games are not up to commercial grade. And that's okay, right? Because, we're a research university, and it's got to be good enough. And students would tell us that. They'd love it, no matter what we thought about it. Stickiness, the harder the game, the more like challenged they were, and that was just like, wow. Just some observations we would see over and over, that sort of in the classroom, because everyone's going at their own pace. A student would raise his or her hand, hey, I need help on X, Y, and Z. Teacher would come over and help out, and the feedback we get from the students was, wow, this is the first time the teacher talked to me. So this whole idea that kids get stuck at different points in the game became like these teachable moments. And then the teacher, who was like, she hadn't, drank the Kool-Aid yet, after all that sort of that experience, was like, yeah, she became a evangelist person at the school. I was like, dude, slow down. Anyway, so, all right, just some things on impact, innovations. So, make games, transfer. So play in game space, increase performance on standardized test-like items. New methodology, stay tuned for the next session. What I call just craziness in terms of the tech reports. So we get like 70,000 downloads over 22 tech reports since 2010. We're averaging about like 100 to 200 a month. It's just a crazy time. What's going on? A bunch of journal stuff and other dissemination outlets. But then the other thing is, so a lot of the things that we worked on to run 24 studies in 2 years sort of like forced us to like think about, all right, what sorts of tricks can we develop so that we can run 24 studies in 2 years? And well, one is a coherent design process. Try to get it right. Specify the learning requirements up front. Design against it. Think of the platform as a test bed where we can vary variables of interest, so that we don't always have to go back to the programmer, recompile, rebuild new game. Instead, just use like scripts, basically, to vary what you want to vary. So that, and then that freed up the programmers to focus on the game design, and that let the education people develop game levels that were tuned to the educational or the learning component. And I think this kind of gameplay as a data source. The whole idea that you got telemetry, or rather, you should instrument a game to collect and things that might be of value learning-wise, the telemetry. Oh, and make sure you structure it so that it's useful and usable when you're analyzing data, because what's human readable, not so good for SPSS. The idea that, map the game mechanics to the mathematics as directly as possible. Because, gee, if I want to learn math, we should do math, but, kind of an off-ramp. So, in one of our games, like solving equations, balanced metaphor, the developer just pushing back on putting an equation like there in the game. It's gonna destroy the game. Dude, we're like solving equations. How is he gonna do it? Anyway, okay. All right, so I think that's it. And I'm gonna leave this quote that a student wrote on a test, unsolicited, she just did. And then I'll take questions. You guys can read it. Any questions?